Hey everybody, and welcome to this, my third of 3 videos on the Canon EOS-1D Mark II. This is the Mark IIN, and there will be some minor differences in the menu system in this camera versus what's described in the camera manual that's linked in the video description. Also, some differences because I believe that the last version of the firmware for this camera included some menu changes. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the display on with the display button. Oh, you can see the last photo I took. Okay, there we go. I'm going to push the menu button. Oh, turn the display on. There we go. I just wasn't pushing the menu button correctly. All right, so push the menu button, and that brings up these menus. We're going to hold down Select, and now holding Select, we can scroll through the different menus. These are the image menu, Playback, Settings 1, Settings 2, and Custom Functions. So if you're looking for something specifically in one of these 5 menus, check the video description and you will get a time-linked index to go to one of these 5 major headings. Okay, once we have gotten to the one that we're looking for, we release Select, and that will drop the selection tool down here to the bottom, but we can't adjust it until we hit until we hit display, and now we can scroll through here. And we have to hold these buttons down, by the way. It's kind of a wonky interface. Custom white balance. So with custom white balance, what you're going to do is you're going to pick a photo that you have taken, and the camera will then adjust the white balance to that photo. So let's say that you're doing studio work, and you have a white card. This is a white card right here, and basically it's just a plain white piece of plastic. What you would do is take a picture of that white card under your existing lighting, and then go into custom white balance, select that photo, and then the camera would select the white balance from that photo and set your custom white balance to match that photo. JPEG quality, large, medium 1, medium 2, and small. Basically, if you're shooting JPEGs, this is how big the file is. You can make a whole lot more out of this camera by shooting RAW. And as you can see with large JPEGs, it can, with RAW files, the CF card will hold 1,400 RAW files. I misspoke earlier when I said about 500. All right, parameters, standard. So your parameters are basically standard, set 1, 2, 3, and set up. You can set your own image parameters. Standard is realistically going to be the one you want to use the most on this, because any settings you can adjust in this, being a 15-year-old camera, you can do way, way, way more editing the RAW files from a standard setup in post than you can in this camera. So set it in standard, shoot RAW, do your editing on your computer. You'll have much better results. Color matrix is, your choices are standard, portrait, and these other ones here. Again, set it to standard. That's going to be standard RGB. The other ones, except for Adobe, will give you special toning. Shoot RAW, shoot in standard, do your work on your computer. Your results will be much better. Review off or on with information. This is instant review. Do you want to see your photos right afterwards? Yes or no? And if you do you want them to display information like the histogram and so forth? Review time, if you select on, it's 2 seconds, 4 seconds, or 8 seconds, or until you tell it to turn off. You can tell this is an old menu interface because newer Canon cameras, like the generation after this one, combine the last 2 menu items into one. Noise reduction, off or on. This is a 15-year-old camera. If you use noise reduction on this, your results from noise reduction will be worse than if you just do it on your computer with whatever photo editing software you have at your disposal. ISO expansion, off or on. On gives you access to 50 and 3200. That's it. Matter of personal preference which one you want to use. Going now to the Playback menu, Protect Images. This allows you to protect your images, all that are in a folder. You can clear all of the protection in a folder. Select all of the images on your card or to protect, or clear the protection from all of the images on your card. Basically, if you want to protect images to make sure they aren't deleted accidentally, you can do that here. And if you're using multiple folders on your card, you can select protection for just one of those folders. Rotate images. You can select individual images to rotate. Oops. Erase everything on the card. You can delete all of the images that are on the card. Really hope I didn't have anything on there that I didn't just take filming video to. Okay, anyway, print order is adjusting the print order of your images. Now this only works with a connection through the mini USB port in your camera. Realistically, even an inexpensive CF card is going to have better data transfer than your mini USB, which is a USB 1. So take the files on your CF card, copy them to your computer that way, print from your computer. Honestly, this is so old that I don't think it even talks to Windows 10. And if you're using an older version of Windows, you're not hearing this because you've already been hacked. Highlight, alter, off or on. Oh, highlight alert. Sorry about that. Highlight alert, alter on. Basically, when you play back your images, on will show you where you've blown out your highlights. So it's a matter of personal preference if that's useful to you or not. Display autofocus points. This will shows which autofocus points were used for the image when you play it back on your camera. So like everything under the blue playback menu, this only applies to playback, by the way. Off or on, matter of personal preference. Okay, histogram display. If you remember from earlier, we looked at, in I think the first menu, playback, whether you had instant review, off or on, or with info. With histogram display, with on info, your histogram will display either brightness or red, green, blue coloration. Matter of personal preference with the histogram display. Settings menu 1, auto power off. Matter of personal preference, 1 minute to 30 minutes or no auto power off. If this is largely battery preservation, but if you have this plugged into a wall because you're doing something very long term, you might want to turn that to off. I like 15 minutes when I'm making these videos, 5 minutes, or in this case 4, when I'm out walking around. File naming, file numbering. Consecutive auto reset and manual. So basically consecutive resets your file numbering at 10,000. Auto resets your file numbering with each memory card change. And manual resets it when you select that and then goes back to whichever you had. So auto reset is not preferred generally because it has a higher chance of you accidentally overwriting files. Let's say you're using 2 4 GB CF cards, and each one of those holds a few hundred images. You could fill both of those up in a day, copy the files from one onto your computer, format it, put it back in here, grab the second, copy the files, accidentally overwrite all of them, and lose everything that was on that first CF card. If you have continuous, the file numbering will continue through the CF card changes, and you won't accidentally overwrite files. Backup, off or on. So this is one of those functions where the online manual shows different options than my camera does. This should back up the images from your CF card onto your SD card or vice versa, and depending on which one you want to have be primary. However, this shows, and that's kind of what this shows here, backing up from the CF to the SD or vice versa. I leave this to off because Leaving it to off will help clear out the buffer a little bit more quickly. Auto rotate is on or off, whether or not you want to have to rotate your camera to look at portrait orientation images, or you want them to rotate on the screen. And this is just a matter of personal preference and LCD size, because this does have a smaller LCD. Save camera settings. What this does is saves your current settings for easy recall. And this saves a file on your CF card. So with those settings, if you change your CF card or format that card, you're going to lose these settings and have to recall them or reset this up. So this is just something you can do if you're really happy with your settings right now and want to save them for reuse. Loading camera settings. This loads your settings from your CF card, the ones that you previously saved in the previous menu option. Settings menu number 2. Okay, first one here is, First one here is LCD brightness. Mostly a matter of battery preservation because the LCD does drain battery, how bright you want it. Outdoors, it helps to have it brighter. Making videos like this, I have it set to the brightest and it's still pretty dim, as you can probably see. So to set it, hold down select and then just rotate your dial to adjust your brightness. Date and time, you can set up your camera's date and time. That's correct. Okay. And then hit display to scroll through these and up and down to adjust them. Language, you can pick from all these different languages. Video system is NTSC and PAL. Now remember, this camera does not record video into it. This has only got to do with the video, the way it's encoded coming out of the video port on the side. This is your firmware version, and you can upgrade your firmware through here. Now that said, I believe that 1.2.6 is the final version. I have been unable to find a download location for the firmware version, and Canon, to the best of my knowledge, does not still host firmware for this camera on their website, or at least I could not find it anywhere on their website. So at any rate, if you have 1.2.6, you have the final firmware. You never have to worry about upgrading it. Sensor cleaning will raise the mirror and open the shutter so that you can clean the sensor with a brush. Custom and personal functions menu. This is going to be the longest part of the video because there is a lot to go over here. I'm not kidding, seriously. This five of the 9-page outline for all 3 of these videos is covered in this area. Okay, so custom functions. We'll go to custom function 1 first. This is your viewfinder display. Does or does not display info in the viewfinder LCD. Basically, it turns on or off the screen in your viewfinder. Matter of personal preference and whether or not you want to have the LCD lit up in your viewfinder. Custom function 2 is firing the shutter with or without the card, and that's just on or off. If you have this on, the shutter will fire without a card. If you have it off, which is not possible, then the shutter will not fire without any memory cards. Using option 1 is a good way to remember that, or to figure out quickly if you don't have a card. If you press the shutter button and nothing happens, you know you need to grab a card before you head out. Skips custom function 3, because it's not used on this camera, goes to 4, which is shutter auto exposure autofocus lock. So your options are 0, 1, 2, and 3. With 0, autofocus and auto exposure lock means pressing the shutter halfway locks auto exposure and autofocus both. Option 1 is good for metering separately from focusing. And in this one, you use the asterisk to focus and then press the shutter button halfway to lock the exposure. So with 0, you're focusing and exposing and getting your exposure at the same time. With 1, you can do them separately. With 2, in AI Servo only, you press the asterisk to pause autofocus. And what that does is if you're tracking, say, somebody running across a field and you know that there's a pole coming up between you and them, you can pause autofocus to keep the subject in focus without it accidentally focusing on the pole. And the exposure is locked when the photo is taken with option 2. And 3 is useful when subjects start and stop, like basketball players, birds, so forth. And exposure is set when the photo is taken, and then the asterisk button pauses autofocus in AI Servo mode. Custom function 5, manual exposure controls. Now, if you remember in video 2 when we talked about manual exposure being controlled by different wheels, this is the custom function where you can adjust that. 0, your shutter priority or your shutter speed is with the command dial, and your aperture is with the rear wheel. 1, your rear wheel controls the shutter speed, and the aperture is controlled by the command dial. 2 is the same as 0, but you can do it without a lens mounted. 3 is the same as 1, but you can do it without a lens mounted. So it's just a matter of personal preference which one you want to use. 2 and 3 are good if you want to set an aperture and then have the lenses, have that aperture remembered between lens changes. Custom function 6, exposure value increments. 0 is 1/3 for settings and exposure value compensation. So with 0, all of your exposure value is in 1/3 stops. With 1 stop exposure value compensation for your shutter speed and aperture, 1/3 stop for exposure value compensation. 2 is half stop settings for everything. This is mostly personal preference and shooting style. Option 1 allows you to scroll through exposure settings quickly, but you can obtain more accurate settings with 0 and 2. I like 0, especially with older cameras, because the raw file data, the raw programming and the sensor don't record quite as much. So if you get as close as possible, even shooting in RAW, you can do a lot more with the raw files. Custom function 7 is ultrasonic motor lens electronic manual focus. So what this means is that in 0, manual focus will turn on after one-shot autofocus. In 1, manual focus turns off after one-shot autofocus. And 2, disables manual focus in AF mode. This applies only to ultrasonic motor lenses, and manual page 163 has more detail on this if it applies to you. Basically, 1 and 2 will prevent accidental manual focus bumps, shifting your manual focus or shifting your focus point. 0 will not do that. Custom function 8, top LCD panel, back LCD panel. So this is the back LCD panel, this is the top up here. With 0, they display the remaining shots and file number. So what we have here are the ISO and file and remaining shots. With 0, the ISO would be replaced by the file number. Or rather, the remaining shots would be replaced by the file number. With 1, it displays the ISO and remaining shots. That's remaining shots on your memory card, by the way. With 2, it shows the ISO and your file number. And in 3, it shows how many shots are in the current folder you're using, as well as how many shots remain on your memory card. This is a matter of personal preference. I like setting 1. I don't need to know the file number when I'm shooting. Doesn't matter one bit. Knowing how many shots are left in the folder doesn't really help me any. Knowing how many are left on the CF card, however, really does. Custom function 9 is your auto exposure bracketing sequence and cancellation. Your options are 0, 1, 2, and 3. 0 is proper exposure, under, over, automatically cancels after one sequence. 1 is proper exposure, under, over, and auto exposure bracketing will continue until you turn it off yourself. 2 is under, proper, over, automatically cancels after one sequence. 3 is under, proper, over, will not, and then it will repeat that sequence until you cancel it yourself. Matter of personal preference, how you want your images displayed on your computer. I personally like having to turn on and turn off auto exposure bracketing myself, and I like to see them under, proper, over. Totally personal preference for you though. Custom function 10 is autofocus point illumination. 0 is your standard setting, which is your autofocus points are on. 1 is your autofocus points are off, meaning there's no autofocus point illumination in the viewfinder. 2 is they are on and without dimming, so selected autofocus points will not be dimmed. And 3 is brighter, meaning that your selected autofocus points will be brighter than the non-selected autofocus points. Just a matter of personal preference and what kind of information you want to see in your viewfinder. Custom function 11 is autofocus point selection method. So your 4 options are 0, which is autofocus point button, this guy right up here, plus the command dial moves focus points left and right, and the autofocus point button plus rear dial moves them up and down. That's the default. It's very easy to remember. It's very similar to it, or the exact same interface as Canon's default. Option 1 is your EV button, which is, well, on the back, it's this guy right here. This guy right here as well. So it selects your autofocus and then has the same interface in terms of wheels. Option 2 is your rear wheel by itself moves left to right, and the lower white balance button plus the command wheel moves up and down. And then option 3 is the same as options 1 and 2, except using the FEL buttons. Really, it's personal preference, but honestly, using the autofocus selection button is going to just make a little bit more sense. Custom function 12 is mirror lockup, enable or disable. Basically, what you want to do with this is use it when you're going to use MLU. When you enable it, you press the shutter button once, your mirror locks up, you press it a second time, you take the photo with the mirror locked up. So if you enable this, you will have to push the shutter button twice to take each photo. It's only good to enable this if you are specifically going to do mirror lockup shooting for things like star trails, waterfalls, cloud trails, microscopy, and so on. A really good combination here, if you're doing mirror lockup, is to enable it, hit the button to lock it up, and then also use your self-timer. So when you hit the shutter button a second time, it counts down from 10. So you push the button the first time to lock up the mirror. The shake from the mirror moving up is eliminated from the system because time will pass. Push the shutter button, the shake in the system, for your camera and your tripod, from the shutter button being pushed is eliminated because the self-timer is going to count down, and then you have the minimum amount of shake that is possible with what's within your control. Custom function number 13, number of autofocus points and spot metering. You have 4 options here. 0 is the all 45 AF points are active, and bear in mind this only is in effect when spot metering is used. So all 45 autofocus points are active, and the center AF point only and always is used for spot metering. With option 1, the central 11 autofocus points are active, and the 11 central autofocus points track the motion of the subject, And then the actively used autofocus point provides metering data. So only the central 11 autofocus points will turn on with spot metering, and the one that is used will provide 100% of the metering info. With option 2, all of the 11 central autofocus points are used, but only the central AF point is used for metering. So between 0 and 2, the difference is the number of autofocus points, and if you use number 2, it's just a little bit easier on the camera to track what's in focus. Option number 3 is the 9 central autofocus points are active, and then the selected autofocus point provides metering. Between 1 and 3, the difference is whether you want 9 or 11 autofocus points. Matter of shooting style and personal preference, and whether or not you even use spot metering. Custom function 14 is E-TTL 2. This only applies for flashes. And the difference is when you're using a flash, is your through the lens metering the evaluative or averaging. Evaluative will help prevent bright spots and dark spots in your scene. Custom function 15 is shutter curtain sync. And if you'll remember from video 2, we talked about first curtain sync, when the first curtain finishes traveling, then the flash fires, versus second curtain sync, right before the second curtain travels, the flash fires, and there it goes. This is where you set that. 0 is first curtain sync, 1 is second curtain sync. Custom function 16 is safety shift in shutter priority or aperture priority, disable or enable. If you disable this and you select an aperture that the camera cannot give you a shutter speed for in aperture priority, or vice versa, if you're in shutter priority and select a shutter speed that the camera cannot give you an aperture for, then the camera will still take the photo, but it will either over or underexpose. With enable, the camera will change your settings to give you a proper exposure. That's the difference, matter of personal preference largely. With custom function 16, by the way, in aperture priority, that will almost never be an issue because of how large the range of shutter speeds on this camera is. Custom function 17, autofocus point activation area. And your options are 0, 1, and 2. So with 0, you have a single autofocus point activated. So what happens is your autofocus point will be active, and that is the focus point, any one of the 45. With option 1, that expands to 7. And what that means is you have an active autofocus point, and then the 6 around it will assist in refining the focus. With option 2, that expands to 13. You have the 1 active, and then the 12 around it will assist in refining focus. So it's personal preference largely, but I like 2 because more autofocus points can make focus more accurate. However, the downside is if you do 1 or 2, it will slow down the autofocus slightly. Custom function 18 is switching to a registered autofocus point. Your options are 0, 1, and 2. With 0, the X button, which is this guy right here, and the AF selection button will switch to a registered AF point. With option 1, the X button toggles to and from a pre-registered autofocus point. And with the X button here, it will switch to that pre-registered point, and after you release this, then it will revert to not using that pre-registered point. Okay, so what is this good for? When you register a certain autofocus point to use, this function switches to that autofocus point from whichever point is currently active, assuming it's a different one. This is useful if you have a stationary camera, know where your moving subject is coming from, and want to track it. What you do is you register an autofocus point on the far side of your frame, in the direction from which your subject is coming, turn on that active autofocus point. When your subject approaches, snap a few shots as they are in that autofocus point, and then turn it off to track them through the rest of the frame. Custom function 19 is lens autofocus stop button function. This only applies if your lens has a stop button on it. 0 is autofocus stops. 1 is autofocus starts and operates only when the autofocus button on the lens is pressed. 2 locks your auto exposure for whatever the meter reading was when the button is pressed. 3 switches the AF point from the manually selected one to automatic autofocus point selection. 4 switches between AI servo and one-shot autofocus functions. 5 starts image stabilization. 100% personal preference on this and whether or not you even have a lens with that button. Custom function 20, AI servo tracking sensitivity. Standard, slow, moderately fast, and fast. This adjusts how fast the autofocus moves and can be used to fine-tune for different settings. The slow and moderately slow settings will help prevent autofocus from being thrown off by an object passing between the subject and camera. This is good, slow and moderately slow. If you don't want to use the asterisk button to disable autofocus as we saw earlier in the custom functions. Moderately fast and fast are ideal for multiple subjects at various distances, such as when you're shooting sports or kids at a playground, something like that. Custom function 21 is your drive speed in priority AI servo. This is enable or disable. With option 1, which is enable, the camera will take photos even if your focus is not yet achieved. All right, and the last one is going to be custom function number 0. This is your focusing screen selection function. There are 2 options, 0 and 1. If you have the default focusing screen, that is option 1. Option 0 is only for the ECN and ECR focusing screens. If you don't know which one you have, take a look in the Viewfinder and then try to match it up with the listings online. And that is it for the custom functions. Next, we're going to take a look at the personal functions. In the camera, you have the ability to do one thing with personal functions, and that is save up to 3 sets of custom functions for different users, different situations, so on and so forth. You can do that. That's it. Down here below that, you have clear all custom functions, which will erase all the custom functions you just set. Here is clear all personal functions. There are an array of personal functions that you can set with this camera. They require that you have software that came with the camera and that you've connected your camera to your PC in which the software is installed via the USB port. To the best of my knowledge, and if I'm wrong on this, someone in the comments will correct me, neither that software nor this camera can communicate with a Windows 10 PC. Like I said, if I'm mistaken, I'll be corrected fairly quickly. So if you are using a modern PC, you probably cannot set up your personal software functions anyway, and I could not find the software needed to use it for download. So what you want to do if you have just bought this camera and it's new to you is, dang it, go into your personal functions, select OK to clear all of the personal functions, and wipe them out. The reason being that you won't be able to know or change if the personal functions were set up and adjusted by the previous owner. And it's best just to reset this to the default setting in the camera. The manual does include an entire list of what all the personal functions are if you have the software and a computer that you can connect your camera to. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.